got a couple of questions from our audience. Here's one that says, is there a law that prevents double or triple dipping? Is it possible either on the county or the state level? As you know, that is one of the hot button issues. Public officials getting 2 or 3 pensions and other types of abuse, which when they get out in the press just make people's blood boil, and they want to know what they're paying for and why this is allowed to go on.
At the risk of a firestorm, I don't understand this complaint at all. I really don't.
Why not?
I'm going to explain it to you right now, okay? You earn a pension. You know, you complete your career. You do your years of service. In an IMRF environment, if it's properly funded, it's fully paid for. You and your employer put the money aside, and your lifetime annuity is funded when you leave. That's the way it's supposed to be. That's the way it is in the private sector. I mean, if somebody leaves GM on a pension and they go to work for Ford, is it double dipping?
Talking about elected officials. But aren't those pensions often capped?
We're not just talking about elected officials. No, they're not capped. You earn what you earn. There should. I'm against abuse by elected officials. I'm against salary spiking, the kind of things that Senator Milano did. Apparently, Mayor Daley didn't pay the full contributions that he might have paid if he'd done it a certain way. But let's remember, the guy served 40 years. He earned his pension. And for the Chicago Tribune to say, oh, his contributions didn't fund his pension, well, duh, of course they didn't. The employer funds the other half of the pension. So I really think that this double-dipping thing has gone too far. Abuses, we're against them. Salary spiking, bad. Pensions should be funded on a sound actual basis going forward for the mayor as well as the worker. But the idea that somehow you're not entitled to earn a second pension when you've already earned a pension, I don't understand that.
And
you are.
Do you understand, though, the public response to your response?
Understand the public response, and people are whipped out. I'm just saying, as a matter of employee benefits, as a matter of employee benefits, and as a matter of earned compensation, if a person in the private sector earns a full pension benefit at a company and they retire, they can go work any place else they want, and nobody has the slightest concern that they are now accruing a second pension in the private sector. That's all I'm saying.
Well,
I think the practice is
in double dipping. I don't think it's technically getting 2 pensions that has created voter umbrage from all the public speaking I do. I think it's when years of service translate from one public office to another. So you've earned a very high pension over here. You work somewhere else for a year, but you get 15 or 20 years worth of service. And there are some problems with that, quite frankly, in the local funds, in the Cook County funds and in the Chicago funds, where years of service can transfer over. And so you can now get an inflated pension from 2 different public payers. I think those are the kinds of things that make people upset. If you went to your new job and you started as a year 1 worker earning just what a year 1 worker's benefit would be, I don't think taxpayers would be very upset about it. So it's those practices that create the outrage in the taxpayer and make them concerned that maybe the whole system is set up and gamed. And it's interesting, the state has recently done away with most of the former loopholes in the law that has allowed that. And I read with interest one of the more recent ones that passed was specifically on this kind of thing. And the fiscal note to it said this affects 27 people in the state of Illinois. So it was really, truly an insider type benefit that had no material impact at all on the pension systems, but certainly had a material impact on public perception. And it is just simply not right that insiders design legislation in a way that allows them to game the systems.
Anyone else want to respond to Lawrence?
Just a couple of things. It might help you, Hank, if you didn't consider the pensions deferred compensation. Because pensions are not traditionally deferred compensation. They are security for when people are no longer able to work. The state has a deferred compensation system. The deferred compensation system means what part of your salary do you not want to receive this year, and so when you retire, you can draw that down. We'll put that in a separate fund, and you'll be able to earn interest on that. The other thing is, the whole issue in Illinois, having so many different funds, all created and controlled by the legislature. The amount of legislation that passes, like Henry's I'm sorry, like Hank's idea about how we could create a guarantee for the state that nobody gets to see until it becomes law, then we'll show it to you what it is just ridiculous. Other states do not operate this way, where everything is a black box operation, and then we get to see what the implications of the law are. There's no justification for the Illinois General Assembly to allow former members of the General Assembly to retire and then come back into the pension system. There's no public policy behind it. There's no public policy for having I would ask you, what is the benefit to the citizens and the taxpayers in Illinois for having a separate General Assembly pension fund, as opposed to giving them the same benefits that they would earn in the regular employees' pension fund?
There is none.
I agree with almost everything you said. The reality, though, is pensions are a form of deferred compensation. And, you know, one of the things that has happened in this country is, in the private sector, the business community has pretty much destroyed the defined benefit pension system in favor of these account-based systems. And, you know, now they want the public ones too. I understand that. I don't have to agree with it. I don't have to like it. I mean, the reality is there is no such thing as retirement security anymore in the private sector. You look at the readiness of private sector employers in these account-based systems to retire, and they can't. And it's a huge problem that as a country we've ducked for the last 30 years. And, you know, we're going to have to face up to it at some point. I don't think it's good public policy for the public sector to emulate the private sector.
Okay, got another question here, and this one is specifically to Commissioner Gaynor and to Lawrence Massal. If there are to be pension changes for current employees, do you support a transition period or effective date so that current employees 60 years and older are not penalized? Okay.
So the way that any changes, if you look at the changes that are proposed across funds, they change the accrual, they lower the accrual going forward. So the closer you are to retirement, the less of your pension is actually impacted. So one of the dilemmas when you're looking at where to apply changes, there's basically 3 buckets from which you can derive cost savings. There's taxpayers for revenue, there's current employees for benefit changes, and then there's the retirees on the COLA. If you don't engage anything to do with retirees, I think you'll see what you see at the state, which is, I think it was 4,000 people registered to retire post the governor's announcement. I think we have to look at what is an equitable retirement, how do you get there, and what is the way that everyone participates, taxpayers, current employees, and retirees. So obviously the retiree impact needs to be lower because they're in their retirement and they have less of an ability to augment their income. But it certainly needs to be something that's a part of the conversation. And so if we don't talk about it, we're just not talking about it. Doesn't mean we're getting any closer to a solution. So whether you have it, I think you have implicitly a transition program because you've earned more of your benefit and you're closer to retirement and thus less of your benefit is impacted.
Lawrence?
So anything, you know, can be thrown out, and that's how basically we do it in Illinois. We throw out ideas, and very few things get put down in writing before they're enacted. So having a transition plan for some of the older workers to allow them to have less of a brunt on changing some of the benefits at retirement, like raising the age to 67, is reasonable. What we want to see is what the actuaries say the cost of that is. What we want to see is how does that impact other things. We are in a horrible situation for people who want to make good decisions, because we're making pension decisions not based on what the actuaries and what financial experts would tell us is the best way to improve it. Or at least that information is not being shared to the extent we would like to see. The Civic Federation supports Governor Quinn's proposal for pension reform because it's of a magnitude that addresses the problem, that provides some additional security. It gets us off that 50-year funding plan. It gets us to an actuarial-based 30-year plan. The governor does talk about transitions for older workers to account for them. It provides some security in the form of retiree health care benefits, and it creates some of the consideration or choice that some constitutional scholars and politicians say, are required in order to change the benefits going forward.
I do want to ask this question, but Hanky, you're not happy with the governor's recommendations, are you? Particularly the area of choice, you don't see it as a choice?
Our council advises us that the choice that the governor is laying out is not constitutional because it's coerced. When you're forced to choose between two bad options, that is not a choice. And we're quite confident that the framework that he's put out there is unconstitutional. I don't know the people that we're talking with, what their bottom line is and whether we can come to an agreement. I have no idea. We're trying to. We recognize this is a very serious problem and that it does need to be addressed. There's no question about that, but no, we don't think the framework that's out there is the basis for an agreed bill or a solution that would pass constitutional muster.
Anyone want to comment on that? We'll move to the next question. Here's one that's interesting. The federal government does not seem to have a problem attracting quality public servants using a 401k and Social Security as a path to retirement. Why is a 401k and Social Security not on the table as a path to retirement for future county employees?
Future. Well, defined contribution plans are very expensive to administer. The fee structure is astronomical compared to a defined benefit plan. Frankly, putting new employees in Social Security is more costly than the current county pension plan or the city pension plan or the TRS. Personally, I'm not opposed to it, but I think when you crunch the numbers and you look at the 6.2% FICA contribution from the worker and from the employer, and then realize you're going to need to make payments on top of that. Again, the problem here is the debt. The normal cost of the county pension is not that out of line with what large private sector employers pay, combined FICA and retirement costs that they would incur, in the current private sector marketplace.
Real quick, back in the early 60s, the state of Nebraska, which is a pretty conservative Republican state, switched entirely from a defined benefit system to a defined contribution system for all its workers. And in the 1990s, they switched back. And when they were testifying in Congress, remember, this is a very conservative Republican state, the head of the pension system basically said, well, what we discovered was defined contribution, as Hank pointed out, is far more expensive, administrative costs, et cetera, over time than the defined benefit system. So it cost taxpayers more. It provided a significantly lower benefit to workers. So higher costs and lower benefit. And in fact, in Nebraska, what they found was the average retirement benefit paid out was below poverty. And so then the Nebraska Social Services Network would have to then subsidize the income of retiring seniors who worked a full career in public service, rather than having them collect a defined benefit that would have at least gotten them through, was slightly over the poverty level, at least gotten them through their retirement, number one, and was actually at a lower cost. So you have to really be careful that the public sector is not exactly the same as the private sector on a number of different levels. And this is one of those levels. It's actually far higher cost to go to this kind of a system.
I know, Commissioner Gaines, you want to address this, right? But I was going to say, intuitively, look at the mess we're in with the other type of plan. How can you make a case that alternative isn't viable?
Unfunded liability, as all future workers are no longer contributing into your current defined benefit plan.
I'm sorry, who would like to respond?
I was just going to say, so the county contributes 13.1 or 13.09% of payroll into the pension fund. You could have a FICA contribution and you could have a 6% contribution to a 401k plan. That would certainly not be outside the bounds. But to the points that have been mentioned here, and the reason that I at least didn't put forth the idea of moving to a defined contribution plan is, one, you pull all the contributions out of the defined benefit plan, which undermines it. Two, it provides absolutely no retirement income security. When you look at, Fidelity does a national scan of all 401k plans. The average amount in a 401k plan nationally is $60,000. And if you're within 10 years of retirement, it's $75,000. I don't think that that's a solution for anything. I think it moves all the investment risk and all the longevity risk to the person least equipped to manage it, which is the employee, the individual employee. So, and you're not saving yourself any money. You can create a scenario in which you make the benefits sustainable and you make the contribution to that benefit sustainable. But when you want to switch in midstream, I think you can create for yourself a number of unintended costs. And the other question is, do we have, as a society, a different relationship with, police or fire or other people who have been, especially in those types of positions, if they get to a point and they retire and they have no income. And as Ralph said, the West Virginia teachers is another example. So where people have reverted back. I just think that you may see, I think we're seeing the pendulums shifting, even in the private sector universe, where you saw a big move to 401k. I mean, remember, 401k plans were only introduced to this country in the mid-'80s. We've yet to see an entire cohort of retirees retire with a 401k plan without relying on a pension or other ancillary benefit. And so now, when you talk to a lot of the policymakers and people, even the large 401k administrators, they're talking more about retirement income and less about these retirement wealth vehicles. So it's less about how much is the dollar amount that I have in my account versus what does that actually turn into. And so trying to move people towards annuitization, trying to have a focus on retirement income. I think, like a lot of things, we were in the DB world. Employers thought it was too risky and too expensive. They moved to the 401k world. We realize as a society that's not going to give us the type of retirement security we need. You'll see the pendulum, I believe, move back to the center. And so if you're in a defined benefit plan that's, while not perfect, is still fixable, I think that you need to fix it because it is the better solution.
Lawrence? A couple of things. One, the premise of the question was that the feds are having no difficulty attracting workers. Well, there's no evidence that the city, the county, and the state is having any difficulty attracting workers. And the fact that the pension is a part of that benefit doesn't mean that in order to attract workers, we have to continue the same benefit that we have. Bridget has made some good points. Bridget made some good points about how the things are changing. One of the things that are changing in the world of work, many of you are aware, is that people don't stay in the same company that they start with their career. They move on. They move to 10 different companies oftentimes in the course of their career. The government, the idea that the government is responsible, the sole responsibility for someone's retirement once they start there, is one that doesn't match up that well with what other people's experience is. So the other disadvantage, and I think that we need to be cognizant of, because it is a very corrosive impact on the citizens and on the taxpayers, is the abuses. And the fact that the system is set up in such a complicated way, in having so many different benefits for different classes of employees, that we then talk about the median, but then we have these abuses where we have people coming in and out of the system, drawing benefits far in excess of what they earn. So the point of a 401k is it's completely transparent. The government is either going to make your 401k contribution, and you'll know that year whether they made it or not. You won't be hanging in suspense through the life of your career to know whether they're going to make their contribution or whether you'll have a pension.
Ralph, I promised just a little, you said you were going to, short response.
Well, right now, labor markets are not exactly tight, so I think no one has a problem attracting a quality worker. I mean, we've got 3.5 to 4 people for every job opening in unemployment. So this is not really a time where you look at the attractiveness of your system. What you want is a system that has the capacity to attract high-end workers, even in tight labor markets, when in fact you really are competing over workers. Folks aren't really competing over workers now. Highly qualified people are taking very low-paying jobs.
Okay.
We've already reduced the pension benefits radically for new entrants into the public sector in Illinois. So that problem is solved. It was solved January 1st of 2011. New entrants have age 67 is their normal retirement age. New entrants have a future cost of living adjustment that's the lesser of half a CPI or 3%. They're already going to have their final average salary calculated not on their final 4 years, but on their final 8 years.
Folks, we
so that's already been done. As far as the issue of the defined contribution versus defined benefit, actually one of Bridget's colleagues, Flick Fornia, did a masterful treatment of that And anybody who really wants to get educated on that subject, you should Google "more bang for the buck" by Mr. Forney. He's an enrolled actuary and explains in great detail the underlying cost advantages of defined benefit plans versus defined contribution plans. It's bad for the taxpayers to set up these 401k accounts. Our goal should be, as Bridget said, what kind of pension do we need to assure adequate income in retirement? The most cost-effective way to do that is through defined benefit pension plans.
Starting to run a little short on time. I got one more question from the audience. I'll just throw it out to the panel. Does anybody think that the traditional assured 7.5 compounded return will ever return, should it be 4.5%?
Well, I'll just go to the historic rate of return for Cook County from 1990 to 2010, so this includes the Great Recession, was 7.7%.
And we're talking about the return that the pension funds are counting on, am I right?
Right, but their actual return, including the Great Recession from 1990 to 2010, was 7.7%.
But isn't one of the criticisms that they're too optimistic, and as a result, a lot of bad decisions are stemming from that optimism?
7.5 is less than 7.7. Their
Right.
actual historic return is higher than their assumption.
Right, but one correction, so in 2011, the return of the Cook County Pension Fund was 1.2%, which means that the 5-year return was 2.7, the 10-year return was 4.5, and the 20-year return was now just under 7.5. And so if you have to go back 23 years and average it out to get a return that exceeds the estimate, we're actually having a hearing about this on Monday at the board. And you know, when I put that in the report that they had exceeded over 20 years 7.5, it was based on the end of 2010. I don't think we should drop down to 4.5%, but you know, it's a volatile thing, and when you're relying on the majority of your inputs from investments, you certainly do make yourself vulnerable.
We're not making proper actuarial contributions using the current assumptions. So if we lower them, then it will be more expensive to make the proper actuarial contributions. Now, I regrettably am of the school of Yogi Berra, I think, who once said something along the lines of, predicting the future would be easy if we just knew what the heck was going to happen, or something to that effect. So I actually don't know, but I think you have to have your eyes open. And when you lower the earnings assumption, you raise the contribution. So we can't seem to pay for it based on the current assumptions. So I'm not too keen about getting too far ahead to lower them. I mean, certainly you go to 4.5 or 4.25. That's just that's more sabotage than a serious proposal, because talk about being unaffordable.